All right, looks like we're live. Welcome to the Standout Business Show, where it's all about making a bigger difference by doing business differently. I'm Brad Powell, your Standout Business Coach, and today we're talking about what could be the best workshop design framework in the world. So, if you're one of those people who absolutely hates those clunky, boring workshops, or maybe you're someone who's been leading a clunky, boring workshop, my guest today, who is storytelling coach and workshop facilitator Rob Willis, he's coming on to break down how you can avoid the pitfalls of running a workshop that just kind of drags. And it's really timely for me because later this month, I'm going to lead a one-day virtual workshop, and I do not want it to suck. I want it to be the best and most valuable workshop that you have ever attended. So, the other thing about that is designing a workshop that is truly engaging is actually one of the best ways for you to stand out with the work that you're doing. Because from time to time, we always have to make some sort of presentation, and we all know what it's like to, die by word or PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint presentations that go on and on. If you've ever been in the corporate sector, those things are rampant and they're to be avoided like the plague. So today, Rob is here to help us uncover the secret. And spoiler alert, the secret lies in storytelling and turning the whole design of your workshop into a kind of narrative arc. So stay tuned, because we're going to take a deep dive into how you can design workshops that flow as smoothly as stories. And if that sounds good, let's start the show. All right, Rob, welcome to the show.
Hello, Brad. Good to be here.
And, this whole conversation was inspired by a LinkedIn post you did recently that I saw, where you really broke down in detail how this can work. And basically, you're telling the story of a workshop you led recently with about 200 people, and how you had created this arc so that the whole thing was like this long, engaging journey that you were taking people on. And to me, that's super intriguing. And I really thought, okay, well, this post is cool, but can we go deeper? can we actually, take a couple of the details so that not only myself, but everybody listening can figure out, okay, for my next workshop, I want to be able to apply some of these strategies to the design of how I put my next presentation together. So when you look at workshop design, let's just talk about like the big mistakes or the things that people have been doing that you really want to avoid.
So I think the mistakes for workshop design are kind of similar to the mistakes that people make in all kinds of communication, which is rushing in too quickly with the answer and throwing it at people as a kind of shopping list or list of facts. I like to call it checklist type communication, which is, I have all of these things which I'm going to tell you. I've done all the research. I've got the data. Here it is. And you go through this one after the other. And you think, well, I said everything. That means I'm right. And it's going to work. It comes from, I think, how we're educated. We are, at least where I was educated in the UK, it feels like in exams, we were pretty much judged on quantity of information and accuracy of information. But when you get into the working world, you realize that quantity and accuracy is not the way you build impact. And definitely when it comes to delivering a workshop and you're trying to get people to change behaviors in some way, you're going to have to find more of an arc. So yeah, happy to take you through this. Where do you think we should start for people?
Well, I think, the first thing that you mentioned was just mapping out the journey. And I really like the idea of looking at this as a kind of a journey, that it's a path that you're outlining and saying, here, we're starting here and we want to go over there.
Yeah.
And so what were the elements that you include in just the features of any kind of map like that?
Okay, so start super simple is what I'd say. Because we're trying to move away from the checklist, lots of information, and really break it down to the simplest story structure there is, which is beginning, middle, end. Like just like your mum used to tell you at night, like a story just has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And any piece of communication does as well. And I think that's how we need to think about it. Now, a good question would be, okay, what's the beginning, what's the middle, and the end? So the beginning would be, where are your audience right now? The people in your workshop, where are they? What is their problem? I believe it was Aaron Sorkin said that all the story is a character who wants something and there's an obstacle. So identify what is that obstacle. What's keeping people up at night? What are they worried about? The frustrating thing here is they may not be totally aware of the problem that you're going to solve for them. You need to start where they are and show them what the problem is. Yeah. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. At the beginning, understand what is the problem that you're going to solve. And at the end, what is success going to be? What are they going to be after this workshop with you? And the middle, you fill this in afterwards. It's very intuitive from this point. If you understand where people are and where you want to get them to, work out the top 3 things they need to know, the high-level topics, the high-level takeaways that they would need in order to achieve that goal.
All right. So just give an example, like in the workshop that you were leading,
Yeah.
What did that look like? What was the beginning and what was the end to the stuff that you were talking about?
Yeah, so the reason I needed to spend quite some time on this was that workshop was actually a series of 3 workshops for a lot of people, and it wasn't compulsory to go to all of them. So not only did I have an overarching flow for 3 workshops, each individual one had to have its own particular arc as well. So I needed to work on it on 2 different levels. I guess it's a similar if you're creating a TV show. Each episode needs to have a story arc, and then that feeds into an episode, and the episode feeds into the series, and the series into the world of the story. So, that's nothing unusual about that, I guess. So what I did was I sat down with the clients and I discussed what are the kinds of challenges they see in the company. To make it easier for me, I'd worked with the company a lot, so I knew a lot about them. I knew about the challenges they had. I knew about what they had to do. So I had to think about, okay, what are the 3 professional environments in which these people are challenging to communicate? And I broke it down into 3 topics in the end. The 3 workshops were nail your next update. That was the first one. 2 was about driving action, about persuasion, which I feel was like the next stage. And step 3 was more about collaboration. How do you actually work with people? All under this arc of storytelling and more effective communication at work.
Yeah, that's cool. That's great. All right. So now that we have this kind of, let's just call it a destination. We know where we're going. We know where we started. And now there's the messy middle part, like somewhere in there. there's obstacles, but there's also solutions. And and there's probably more than one along the way, especially if you're doing what you just did, which was like 3 separate stages of your workshop.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little about, encountering the obstacles along the way and then picking up, like, I know that in your post you were talking about like insights and aha moments that you want to slot in. And I think that this was something to really be thinking about for a workshop thing. I think most people make the mistake of thinking that, well, the big aha is going to be at the end. Like at the end, I'm going to reveal the final thing, and everybody's going to go, oh my God, that's amazing. You blew my mind. But actually, you want to be shifting and changing perspective along the way so that you're pulling people along with you, I think. So talk about that process.
So firstly, I would say the mistake, or rather, it is a mistake to feel that you are the one who has to reveal the aha moment. In fact, I would say that it ceases to be an aha moment if you are the one who reveals it. The idea is you want to build up a kind of tension and create an environment in which people kind of come to the answer on their own. Now, this totally depends, of course, on the size of group. If you're dealing with 200 people, then you do need to explicitly say what the aha moment is. If it's a smaller group, then you want to create exercises and discussions and give them questions that lead them to coming up to the solution themselves. When they have some agency, it's more relevant to them and they're more likely to follow through on it. I mean, you coach, don't you, Brad? So I imagine you've got some experience of sharing questions with people and they come to the answer themselves. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the main job of a coach, is not to really say stuff, it's to ask stuff.
Yeah.
And it carries over into the podcast realm. I mean, one of the ways that I hone my skill as a coach is by doing interviews like this, where I'm constantly asking and I'm doing my best to listen. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons why I do the style of podcasting that I do, which is more conversational. Like I don't have a bunch of questions that I came up with earlier. It's more of, we're starting a conversation and I'm listening to what you have to say. And then that's keying something in me that I can add to our discussion.
Yeah. I think it's a relevant way to think about building a workshop as well. Again, it totally depends on where you're doing the workshop, how many people are there, etc. But it is a conversation and you are building something with others, and they will appreciate more the stuff that they were able to have some agency in creating. Very often you'll get requests for workshops which are like, oh, can you just give us some tips? People feel that checklist style approach of just deliver bits of information, that's going to be enough. But think about any of the big breakthroughs or the achievements that you've had in your life. It's knowing more didn't make them happen. Taking continuous action did. And when you're planning a workshop, you need to be able to visualize what that will look like. To give it a analogy, one of my previous jobs, I guess, when I really learned about storytelling, was I was working as a tour guide in Berlin, and I would have to find routes for people starting in one place, finishing somewhere else. And that route would have to have some sort of narrative arc to it. And on the way, you'd need to build up a whole story for them. You'd also tell the stories of the individual points. You'd need to think about, okay, what are they doing before and what are they doing after? And it would need to make sense in the idea of their day. You'd have to think about where they're going to get a little bit tired, where they're going to have questions. It's the same principles for building a workshop. Actually, for any, building a meeting, a keynote, you need to think about what's the context of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you're doing working as a tour guide. It reminds me, in my past life, I was an outdoor educator working for Outward Bound and taking young people out into the outdoors. And the cycle of our facilitation, first of all, we're really facilitating how to confront some kind of challenge in the outdoor world and be okay with being there and be okay, as a group working together so you don't just all melt down, and also individually how you can meet the challenge and be comfortable and confident in that kind of environment. And but the truth was that from day to day there were all these little cycles of activity. Things would happen spontaneously and some things we would plan. But the facilitation was, where's the group now? Where do we think they want to be? And how can we facilitate the growth that will allow them to get there?
Yeah. And you also have to, of course, think about all the stuff around it. Like, okay, what's their limit? How far can they go in all of this?
Right.
If you're dealing with a group of teenagers who have never climbed a mountain before and you send them up K2 or something, it's a recipe for disaster.
It's not going to
You need
work
to
very well.
you need to find a challenge that they're going to be able to engage with in that, well, what we're talking about workshop, but in that instance, the experience.
Yeah. I used to talk to the staff about having virtual tachometers, so you can gauge.
Mhm.
And have a tachometer that was for the students, and
Mhm.
you're always watching and make sure that there's sometimes you would have it like do things so that you know that they're going to go into the red zone and they're going to be challenged there.
Yeah.
But make sure that they're not so far that they'll never come back. Like they're going to just be destroyed there. But it's sort of like there's this thing of bringing them up and then helping them come back out, kind of thing. But at the same time, watching your own tachometer so that no matter what's happening, your own tachometer is never going into the red.
Yeah. Because
Self-regulating.
you need to be the one helping them if they can't go any further.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
you need to find the limits, the bounds, and I think visualizing all of that, then you will kind of know what's required for the rest of the workshop. You will have such a clear idea of, okay, we start the workshop at this time in this location. It's online or in person. What are they doing before? This is how we're going to get people into the right frame of mind. This is the exercise that's going to help them engage with the problem and see where they are right now. Then these are the three main topics. And for these topics, we're going to watch that video or have that discussion and discuss this question. They're going to do this particular exercise. And at the end of all of this, there's a exercise where they can bring everything together and try it out. And at the end, we're going to discuss how we're going to move on beyond the workshop. You can really see everything without having made a single slide by this point. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know what you need. And then you can just sit down and methodically go through putting it all together. And you feel ready for the workshop by this point. And the weirdest thing I found from working like this is, for some reason, I always seem to finish pretty much exactly on time. Having said that, now I'm tempting fate and I'm not going to go terribly over time in the next workshop. But when you have this clear idea of how long is it going to take, this is going to take them a bit longer, then there'll be a bit of a fumble to get them back to their seats for this bit. Once you have all of that taken into account, you can kind of judge how long it's going to be quite accurately, actually.
Yeah, that's great. I can really appreciate that. I mean, because there's a lot of elements, especially when you're facilitating group exercise. You really don't. I mean, you can put a time limit and say, okay, put your pencils down or whatever. But still, people are always wanting to ask questions. Some people, when they ask a question, they tend to tell their own story while they're doing that, and so it can take a lot longer. And so it's a real trick to pay attention during those moments. So when you're looking at like this whole picture of designing a workshop with this narrative arc as a thing, like I see it as, especially when you're talking about doing a series, which is great. Like we're constantly, as business people, now compelled to put out various kinds of content. And a workshop or a masterclass delivery is just another form of that content. And we are doing things not necessarily repetitive in that, if you're working for a particular client and they want to hire you to come and do something, well, they're going to want to bring you back, but not to do that very same thing again, most likely. And so we're always thinking in a series. And I like to look at it from the point of view of, well, what would be compelling so that when I do something with a group of people, that they're going to want to come back. Like you leave an appetite so that, and you're building something that the experience that they've had is so compelling that they're going, oh, this was fantastic. We could certainly use a lot more of this. And so this is what I want you to speak to in terms of as design elements that not only are getting them to the destination, but are building an appetite and even a kind of the challenge of, you guys as an organization or as a team or whatever the group is like, as a cohesive whole, you guys have now achieved a certain level, but we're just getting started. Like there's a lot more that you could do, and be putting them in that mindset of, oh yeah, we're on a pattern of growth here.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd say is give a good enough workshop and they probably will hire you to give exactly the same thing again to other people in their organization, because most of the organizations I work with are at least 1,000, 2,000 people, and there's usually more people who need the same training. And people in your group tell their friends about it and they want to come along to it. So have to acknowledge that some people won't have seen your training already. And though it may feel frustrating at times, repetition is kind of part of your job, whatever you do. So that's one thing I say. Sometimes you do need to repeat. When it comes to developing, I think I want to make it clear that you shouldn't ever hold anything back when you're presenting. Give people a complete experience and they'll want more. And there's always more that you can talk about. There's either taking the same principles and applying it to something else, or there's discovering new principles. Very often, it's simply taking the same principles and applying them in different situations. But you can grow the topic as well. Actually, at the end of last year, I gave a workshop to a team who I'd worked with already. And the client said, like, hey, like almost everyone has done your workshop 2 years ago or something. And I was a bit worried about this because I thought, okay, well, everyone's done it. But there's a few people who haven't. So how do I include people who haven't done it, but also provide something new and exciting for those who have? And I guess the answer was just looking at what was going on right now, because there'd been a 2-year gap in between the two workshops. They had slightly different needs. They had a new executive team who wanted them to communicate in a different way. And all I had to do was discover what is the new context. The principles of storytelling are the same. I didn't invent them. Aristotle did. And it's not really changed a whole great deal since then. But the contexts, of course, the reality of people using these principles, that changes all the time. And the demands of their job, that also changes. So you're always going to find new avenues and ways to apply this stuff.
Yeah. And one thing else I'd like to talk about is during the process of going through a workshop like this, you mentioned this in your post, calling it reality checks.
Mm-hmm.
I would call it in sort of a check-in or a debrief, something like that. But there's this element of, you do want to check in with people to see if, like, where they're at, like, have they moved? Are they actually moving along the path, or are they stuck somewhere? And so talk about the techniques that you use to do that kind of check-in.
Mm-hmm. So this will very much depend in what kind of business you are in, if you are B2C or B2B. B2C, in a way, is easier, but harder in other ways. So B2C is easier to get people to make a change because they've put their own money on the line. They want to do this. They are interested in it. And if they're interested in it, they're probably already okay at it. So it's a bit easier to get them to implement things. B2B, which is where I work. So I am very rarely employed by the person who does the training or the facilitation of the workshop. I'm employed by their boss or the people team in their company. So they might be there thinking like, oh, what's this for? Or I didn't realize I had to do this thing. So that's going to be a little bit harder. The 3 pillars of learning are relevant content, a personal motivation, and a supportive environment. Now, as in the workshop, you only really have control over relevant content. You can make sure that it's relevant and that it's good. That should be a given, I think. Personal motivation, you don't have so much control over. The only control that you have is your relationship with the manager. So getting the management team involved, that will both make people more motivated, but also create the better learning environment. There have been some jobs I've done where that wasn't possible to have that kind of coordination. And the challenge you find is people never have time for the training. They never have time to implement it because there's something else going on. and then boss told them they needed to do something, so they forgot to do what you asked them to do, etc. So getting their boss, their whole environment with you, that's going to lead to a more significant change. It's much easier to work with a team than to work with a disparate group of people in an organization, in some ways, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can recall being with groups that, in the Outward Bound work, we also had professional development programs with employees from a company that would be kind of dumped on us. It was kind of like, the teenagers would come and the parents had dumped them on us, and the corporate people would come and the company had dumped them on us and say, you're all going to go out and do team building in the outdoors and be, whatever, and made better. And a lot of these folks are like, why am I here? Why did my boss make me do this? I'm just going to be miserable the whole time. Yeah. And so it was a really interesting magic act to work with groups like that and bring them to a place, like really help them come to a place where they're really okay with what's going on. And not only that, but feeling like they really got value and benefit from the whole experience. And creating that kind of transformation was super rewarding when it was possible, but it's super challenging as well, because you're just right. I mean, often the workshop environment is this, it's kind of like having to go to church on Sunday. It's just like, you might not want to be there, but everybody is telling you that is something you just have to do. And
it can be, but if I might just jump in, I think that if people are going into your workshop expecting a passive engagement, like entertain me, impress me, it's not going to work very well. It doesn't matter how good you are. People need to be involved in the process. And I think that goes for when you're presenting as well, or when you're in a sales conversation. If people are not engaging with you, then it's going to be very, very hard. It doesn't matter how good your content is. So time needs to be spent at the beginning of a workshop, bringing people into your world, showing them what the problem is, showing them how it relates to them. That has to be part of the workshop. If you just go in and start saying, this is how you do this is how you do that, people won't necessarily see the application. They don't necessarily see the need to do it.
Yeah, that's probably the best piece of advice I can imagine. It's just at the start. I mean, sort of, we used to call it framing.
Yeah,
creating a frame that we're going to operate in. And of course, as you continue, you can keep on reframing, like you can bring in new frames and sort of set the pace and the scene, before you actually start telling the story or bringing them along the journey. Super critical, so that people know what to expect, but they also understand that, oh, if I'm going to get anything out of this at all, I need to just do something more than just sit and have you be like the entertainer.
And some people you won't successfully achieve that with.
Sure.
But it's less to do with you than with them, to be quite honest. There may be lack of interest. It might be they're already really good, or they think they are at least. It may be they have something else on their mind. Some things you can't control, but you can do your very best to control what you can.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that might be a really good note for us to close on. We're getting right close to the end of the time. But if there's one other thing that we haven't touched on that you would like to impart around workshop design, I got a whole page of notes here. Really good stuff. But what would you like to add?
To workshop design, this is a tip I got from a book called 2 Hour Workshop, which I think I understood intuitively, but hadn't quite grasped theoretically, was that the way to maintain engagement is contrast. Imagine if you watched a film of just one camera angle, one person speaking the whole time. It would get terribly boring. You have contrast. You have people changing, different characters speaking, different scenes, different things going on. The same needs to be true in your workshop. And you need to think about how the different experiences go against one another. So you'll start with speaking, then there might be a pair exercise, then there might be a video, then a discussion, then a small group exercise. it needs to keep changing. If you have too much of one thing for too long, you will inevitably drop in engagement.
Yeah, right. That's good. Contrast is, well, all good storytelling has that in it.
Absolutely.
If there's nothing to push against, it's not an interesting story.
Yeah. And if the end is not different to the beginning, then it's not a story.
Yeah, right. That's right. If there's no transformation, then nothing happened.
Yeah.
All right, Rob, this has been terrific. I really appreciate you breaking some of this down for us. If people are interested in connecting with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
They can visit my LinkedIn, Rob D. Willis, based in Berlin. Should be easy to find. I also have a podcast called the Superpowered Podcast, where I talk about the unique stories of modern leaders. So I'm really interested in people's X factors, how they got those. And what I think is really unique about it is in every episode, we give people an actionable ritual or exercise that they can try out for the next week.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Well, I'll check that out. Well, I'll make sure that links to both your LinkedIn and to your podcast are in the show notes.
Appreciate that.
Thanks so much for coming on today. This has really been great.
Thank you for having me, Brad.
Yeah. And for those listening at the end, I just want to remind you, if you'd like to go and grab the entire archive of the Standout Business Show, just go to standoutbusiness.show. It's all there, all the audio and all the video. We go live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And until the next time, so long.